This is Sailing Prepper here. I'd like to talk about ICE agents. Now, somebody who knows a little bit about law enforcement because of my past background, I am going to state a few things, okay? We're going to talk about undercovers a little too. So, an undercover agent over years is not like you see in the movies. An undercover agent wears plain clothes, collects information, and then contacts a superior. And when an arrest is made, in most cases, it is done by a uniformed police officer. That uniformed police officer, if not available and an arrest needs to be made immediately, that officer is mandatory to acknowledge during the arrest to acknowledge that he is a police officer. This is for the protection of both himself and the people in process, because if you do not know that the person is a police officer, well, then you have every right to defend yourself against anybody holding a firearm against you. Now, to add to this, okay, so let's say you're a Joe Blow and a police officer in plain clothes points a gun at you and tells you to stop and does all this stuff. And for those of you that are preppers out there, I know exactly what you're going to say. I have a firearm because somebody is in plain clothes and I don't know who the hell they are, and I will defend myself. Well, that is why the police officer then at that particular point of making an arrest acknowledges that they're a police officer and shows you a badge. Okay? Maybe a gun first, but they do show you a badge. Now, due to this fact, I have heard reports of ICE agents that do not explain that they are ICE agents showing badges or identification, in which case they should have, at the very least, a uniformed police officer there helping them. Otherwise, somebody like me who took an oath many years ago, or a police officer, for that matter, even though I'm no longer in that type of deal or going through any kind of schooling or anything, but anybody that is or still does, or somebody like me, like I said, that took an oath years ago for any of that stuff, and is still duty bound by that, who will assume that you are kidnapping with the intent on doing a Class A felony or worse, and there really isn't much worse, but you get my point, will then be duty bound to stop you with any force imaginable, or possibly even a civilian. Now, by not showing this identification or having a uniformed police officer with you, at that particular point, you are now endangering the local civilians around you, your own lives, and the lives of other police officers. Because if a police officer stops up and you are still refusing to do this, or even wait for a police officer that is in uniform, if a civilian demands it, at that particular point, you are endangering both yourself, the civilian, and the police officer, because that police officer is also duty bound to stop you with extreme prejudice, unless you identify yourself. So if, again, you are refusing to identify yourself, that is the situation. Now, if you roll up on one of these guys and they are doing this, one of you, instead of just recording, should be calling the police. And to get the police's attention, I will give you this phrase. I have 2 people that are suspect of blah, 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 kidnapping with the possibility of such and such. And here's the 1028 on the registration of whatever vehicle they are asking for. Basically, you are asking for a registration, a license plate, and registration read. Okay, now they're probably not going to give it to you, but they will give it to the local police officer. That's why you're asking for a 1028. It makes them think that maybe you might know a little something and they should get there. Hate to give that to you, but that's what it is. That's what a 1028 is. So, on top of that, at that particular point, if they do start driving off, use your own judgment. But if it were my case, I would stop them with extreme prejudice, because they may not be ICE agents. And who knows what that person is? They might be just a regular American. Maybe they're Spanish Americans, but maybe they've been living here for years. And maybe this is just somebody trying to do something really bad. But if ICE agents are really doing this, by not acknowledging who you are, or at the very least, having a uniformed police officer show up when you are doing this, you are endangering everybody, including other police officers that might come up and try to stop you. With extreme prejudice, by the way, because if you're an ICE agent, you're probably carrying a firearm. And cops don't react very well to somebody that looks like they're committing a crime and carrying a firearm. So if you haven't acknowledged already to all the local police who you are and what you're doing and where you're doing it, and a police officer doesn't know this could turn out really bad, especially if it's a cop. So please, from one person to another, acknowledge who you are, or at the very least have a uniformed police officer there so that people know that you're not just a kidnapper trying to do bad things. Sailing Prepper signing out.